With this Rangers saga, you couldn't make this stuff up. We expected that today the club would be voted into liquidation, and that happened. We expected Charles Green would buy the assets and set up a new company, and that happened. What no one forecast was that Walter Smith, the former manager, would pop up with a new offer, or that the day would start with rumours the manager, Ali McCoist, was about to walk out. We have a panel of experts who'll try to explain what's going on. But first, here's Julie Peacock.
There's a new Rangers bidder in town. The man who led the club to 10 SPL titles now wants to be the man to rebuild Rangers. Walter Smith says the club should be in the hands of Rangers people who will bring stability. In a statement, he says, "We would call on Mr Green to step aside and allow us to proceed with the deal." But Charles Green isn't acting like someone who's giving up that easily. He called a press conference soon after to confirm he'd completed the purchase of Rangers.
My frustration now is let's get rid of the negativity. Let's pull together. And if Walter Smith wants to be chairman of Rangers Football Club and be chairman of the Football Club Board, I'll appoint him 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
But this is becoming something of a popularity contest, and the backing of fans is important.
For Walter Smith's consortium, the timing of this bid couldn't have been better. It comes on the same day that rumours begin to swirl that Ali McCoist is being forced out of the club in a secret plot by the new owner, Charles Green. This hasn't played well with fans, and judging by the reaction of the fans here today, he isn't popular. They say that they want to see Walter Smith and not Charles Green in charge of their club.
No fans will buy season tickets because of what he's done. He's not coming out to address us.
If he's watching now, I think he should just step aside and let Walter Smith take over, because he's got the best interests at heart for the club. Charles Green's just here to make money and then he'll be away again.
In my opinion, Walter Smith and his consortium should have got the club, but I don't know what they're thinking.
Ali, have you left Rangers?
That's a question Ali McCoist himself's been rather shy about answering. But Rangers' new owner says he knows Ali McCoist is good friends with Walter Smith and would support his friend's bid. But Charles Green says he's never tried to get rid of the Rangers manager.
The issues that I read in the newspaper today about Ali, it's all rubbish. The only good thing they put in newspapers is fish and chips. If we hadn't come along, this club would have closed. The administrator couldn't run forever, and no one put money on the table like we did.
So the new owners are in place and a new club has been founded. But there are still far many more questions than answers over the future of Rangers. But the implications reach far wider than just here at Ibrox. What does this mean for the other clubs in the SPL? And what does it mean for the future of Scottish football?
We asked a few clubs if they'd allow the new Rangers into the SPL. There was no comment from Celtic. Aberdeen says it'll listen to its supporters. So Rangers fans may want to close their ears now.
Well, they're guilty of basically cheating everybody else out of games, trophies, by using money that they shouldn't have been using.
For the integrity of the game going forward, they have to be, punished in the way that's fitting.
They've put it on themselves, so they should just take what's coming to them.
Aberdeen's chairman's already met supporters' clubs, and they've warned him that if he votes in favour of Rangers, they'll refuse to renew their season tickets.
We're looking at this rationally, and yes, it's based on integrity, fair play and consistency. If this was any other team, we wouldn't even be having this debate. The decision would be that they would have to start as of the start of the bottom of the league.
And this is a situation that's been replicated in many of Scotland's clubs.
Scottish football, but particularly the SPL, is in a mess. Despite what the people who run it will tell you, it's in a mess. And the clubs now, they're trying. This is the time of the year when they have to get season ticket money in. It's not coming in huge amounts because the fans are saying, we don't want you to vote Rangers back in as a new co to the SPL. If you do, we won't buy season tickets. So they're holding off. But the clubs need the lump sums now. So they're in a dilemma. Do they keep Rangers out, jeopardise television deals and sponsorship deals, or do they go with the fans and say, fine, Rangers can't get back in?
But a new Rangers may find support from some SPL teams. The BBC understands that two clubs facing financial trouble would consider liquidation if they escaped relegation.
If you do allow one club into the Scottish Premier League as a new entity, obviously you are creating a very undesirable precedent, and other clubs may wish to follow the same route.
No one knows what the next twist will be in the Rangers story. The rest of the SPL may not like it, but whatever happens here is likely to shape events in Scottish football for years to come.
Well, I'm joined now by a panel of experts from inside and outside BBC Scotland. Much of the Rangers story has been unveiled in recent months by our investigations correspondent Mark Daly, business and economy editors Douglas Fraser, and Jim Spence is that rarest of football correspondents, one who usually works outside Glasgow. On my right, we have the sports finance expert Stephen Morrow from Stirling University and the Herald sports writer Richard Wilson. Robert McElroy has written extensively on Rangers history so far, and Ken Patullo is a specialist insolvency practitioner. Douglas Fraser, I can start with you because I want to begin with some facts, because there will be a lot of people watching this programme tonight thinking, what is the situation now? Charles Green owns a new co which has been set up from the liquidation of Rangers, and that is the situation, right?
Yes. What happened today is, as we had expected, the assets which were in Rangers Football Club PLC, that's Ibrox Stadium, it's the training ground Murray Park, it's the squad, those who have transferred, we don't know if they all did yet, and crucially it's the goodwill, which is, in accounting terms, it's the willingness of the customers to keep trusting the brand and keep spending on the value of the brand. That's all transferred across to a new company, which was an empty shell until it was transferred across, called the Rangers Football Club. Chief executive is Charles Green. He's put a chairman in who's a long-time Rangers fan and ought to understand the culture of the place. And that leaves Rangers Football Club PLC, which has held all these assets until now, as an empty shell, except for a bank account with £5.5 million, which was transferred in by Charles Green's people previously, and that's still in the hands of the administrators. It'll be handed over eventually to liquidators.
Now, what about this dramatic bid from Walter Smith? Is that dead in the water?
Well, it looked very naive. It came in just minutes before this transfer, came in to say, how about just stepping aside and giving it to us, because we understand Rangers rather better. But if you go beyond the face value of what they were doing and look at the sort of choreography of, first of all, Ally McCoist apparently threatening to leave. It was followed up, this bid, with some heavyweight names added to it, and clearly Walter Smith himself is a heavyweight name in Rangers terms. What you then got was Rangers supporters organisations saying, well, hold off buying your season tickets for now until all of this gets resolved, but they clearly support Walter Smith. They agree that they want Charles Green to stand aside. That puts a huge amount of pressure on the new owners of these assets, because they've got complete control of the assets, no doubt about that, but they don't have the faith, the belief, the trust of the customers, which in any company has to be pretty bad news.
Right. Stephen Morrow, I mean, it looks like legally everyone seems to accept Charles Green is now in position because of the various documentation. I'm curious as to where you think that leaves Walter Smith. I mean, for example, they were offering £6 million as opposed to $5.5 million. I noticed that one of the things that was said at the press conference tonight by one of Charles Green's people was that, oh, it wasn't $5.5 million, we've spent £10 million. Now, is that just an interesting statement of information, or are they basically putting down a marker for anyone else who wants to come in here?
Indicate, I suppose, a sum of money which they believe they've committed in terms to buy the club, but also trying to indicate that they've spent further sums of money beyond that. And I suppose it's a statement of intent from that point of view. But I think, you know, the more interesting thing, which I think Douglas alluded to there, is the position of the customers, you know, because they will also be looking at this, seeing the emotional response to Walter Smith's name and the other consortium, and this idea that immediately there's a risk that the season ticket holders will not renew. And that, of course, is the basis of their working capital. They need that funds in order, those funds to start coming in.
So your understanding is that other than sales of season tickets, which won't yet have happened, there's no extra money being put in?
Well, I think that we've yet to see any evidence of what that extra money is or how much that extra money is. You know, we understand there will be some, but there's very little evidence on that so far. So I think what you'd immediately be looking at is, well, you need to start trading. We know this was an organisation that was running at a monthly deficit or an annual deficit anyway. That hasn't gone away in a sense, because if some of the players transfer over, those contracts become live again. So very quickly you need to have sources of funding coming in order simply to survive, because they haven't altered the structure of the new company yet.
Ken Patullo, if that doesn't happen, if the fans don't start buying the season tickets quite quickly, I mean, again, just technically, what happens? You've got this this new company.
Yeah.
You don't have any debt anymore.
Yeah.
You've got HMRC off your back.
Yeah.
Because legally, just to make clear, another fact, the big tax case,
Yeah.
even if it goes against Rangers, that's against the old company, isn't it?
Yes,
Not the
that's
new one.
correct, yeah.
Right, but okay, if they don't have working capital because they can't sell season tickets or get money from somewhere else, what happens?
Well, as Stephen rightly said, the company traded at a loss, assuming all the players transfer over to the new company, and that is a very big if. Legal opinion seems to be firmly
We'll
against
talk
that.
about that later, but let's just say they can't make any money from trading.
Well, they will continue to trade at a loss, and the only way they can carry on trading is at a loss. So it's difficult to see how they can continue trading for very long without either Charles Green or some other people in the consortium putting in a lot more money to stave up those losses.
I am curious, actually. Robert McElroy, you're a historian of Rangers. We'll have to treat you as a bit of a fan for the purposes of this question. What's your impression? Do you think Charles Green really does want to come in and own this football club and make a go of it? Or do you think that actually this is a transitional phase, that if he and his investors can make a bit of extra money, they might be, perhaps a few months down the line, more than happy to sell it to Walter Smith and anyone else who's prepared to give them money for it?
Well, I think Charles Green has already said quite openly that he does not see himself being in control of Rangers a year from now. So that partly answers your question. I think Charles Green and his consortium would sell to anybody who offered them a return on their investment. He has claimed to have 20 investors originally, and then it's perhaps now half a dozen investors. And one of the problems that he's faced is that he did not identify these investors. That raised many suspicions that we needed clarity as to exactly who the investors were and how much money they had. I mean, really, as of this moment, we still don't know.
Richard Wilson, you've been writing about this, who these investors are. We got some clarity in the statements today. It didn't get off to a very good start, did they, when one of the people who was listed, Ian Hart, as one of the investors, immediately put out a statement saying, I've got nothing to do with this.
Well, that's classic Charles Green in this so far. I mean, I think Charles has got this far on rhetoric as much as anything else. It's my understanding that he's been struggling to put the money together right from the start. I was rather surprised he managed to get it over the line today. I'm not even sure that the people who are connected with it now will be that keen, given that they now see that they are presented against Walter Smith, Jim McCall, Ali McCoist. I mean, these are Rangers people, Rangers legends, and I think that Charles Green's back's against the wall now, and I don't see how he continues much longer at the club.
Is your view, like Robert McElroy's, that this is, I mean, without being derogatory, an asset play, that they take over the club? If they can get more money than the $5.5 million, then they make a handsome profit?
In my opinion, this was always a buy and flip. Charles Green would come in, buy the club, it would be debt-free, and then he would sell it almost immediately.
Right, and I want to put that same question to our two hard-headed accountants here. Stephen Morrow, is that your view of what's going on here?
Yeah, I think that looks the most plausible explanation of what's happened so far.
Ken Padula, is that your view as well?
I would think it is. It's difficult to see many other possible alternatives and many other reasons why Mr Green has come in to do what he has done. He certainly isn't a Rangers fan. He has no connection at all with Scottish football, so it's difficult to see any possible rationale behind him looking to do what he has done, other than perhaps making some money.
But the good news, I suppose, for Rangers fans who are watching this programme is that just because it looked like Walter Smith came in with a bid at last moment and it got nowhere, that doesn't necessarily mean it won't ever get anywhere, does it?
No, absolutely not.
Right. Jim Spence, you've got your finger on the racing pulse of football. Apparently, Charles Green was booed by Rangers fans as he left the press conference tonight. I mean, we've heard it's obviously a financial problem for him if people don't buy season ticket sales. How big a problem is it in every other sense if you take over a football club and the fans are booing you before you're even sat down in the boardroom?
Well, it's a massive problem. He has no historical link with the club. The Rangers fans, I think, have made it patently and abundantly clear they don't want him now that Walter Smith has entered the fray. Walter Smith, a Rangers man of legendary status, Ali McCoy staying on it, manager, two big Scottish figures, business figures behind him. That, to Rangers fans, seems a much more attractive proposition than a Yorkshireman who, frankly, they probably see as someone being on the make.
Well, yeah, I mean, Stephen Morrow, they always counter to that. If I were Charles Green, I would say, well, hang on a minute. you know, if Walter Smith and his mates really wanted to buy this football club, there was a whole process went through where basically everyone, his auntie was being asked to bid for it. Duff and Phelps, you know, could only act on the bids that they had on the table when they set the deadline. If Walter Smith wanted to buy this, where has he been for the past few months?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very much what has been said, I think, today, where, you know, this has been a very public sale. People have been very well aware that this organisation has been up for sale. I think the difference, I suppose, at this point in time is that we are now through that attempt to have a CVA. That's now gone. So you are at a slightly different situation. You are immediately talking about a new co. We've got away from one of those situations of uncertainty where was there any chance of a CVA? What was HMRC's position? We're now past that. We're at a new co situation, you know, and that may have been another kind of catalyst or another factor which encouraged this bid to come in at this point in time. You were not, in any sense, trying to do a deal with HMRC. That's gone.
Well, Mark Daly, I mean, we have to remember the old company, as Douglas said right at the beginning, is still there. It's now got £5.5 million. But HMRC have been quite keen to make this distinction, haven't they, to say that we don't mind Rangers playing football under a new co. The fans we consider like the customers of any other company that goes into liquidation. They're not to blame for the company. However, this is not the end of this, is it?
Well, I think one of the reasons HMRC favoured liquidation is that it gives the liquidator more powers to investigate what actually went wrong at the club. And I think they can go back 3 years, 3 or 5 years, is my understanding, 3 years, I think.
Yeah.
Which means that they will get to investigate, at the very least, the tail end of the EBT years now. We mustn't forget that the EBT, the Employee Benefit Trust, the offshore tax scheme that Rangers employed for almost 10 years, is one of the main reasons that the club is in this position. Around £45 million was paid out to players, which Rangers probably would have been unable to otherwise afford. During this period, around 13 trophies were won, and it's very much up for debate whether around 80 players that were used by Rangers at this point were illegally registered by the club, and that's now been investigated, of course, by the SPL, and the Rangers now have to think about the fact that HMRC will also be looking very closely at the tax schemes.
But the crucial distinction tonight, isn't it, is if you're a Rangers fan watching this, in a way you've skipped free. The new co doesn't have to worry about any of that. If you've been a director of Rangers in the last 3 years, maybe a few sleepless nights ahead.
Well, there are. David Murray, Sir David Murray, of course, was chairman in 2009. His, what now appears to be a catastrophic business strategy, will come under close examination. His sale of the club to Craig White, who, of course, came in and very quickly adopted a quite curious strategy of failing to pay bills. His tenure will be under examination, and a variety of other directors who came in along with Craig White, and all the directors who were part of the previous board. All of these roles will now be very closely examined by the liquidator, BDO, who has been appointed by HMRC.
Right. Jim Spence, there's one little problem, isn't there, with the new co becoming a football club which could call itself Rangers. And again, let's get the facts of this straight. As of right now, it's not a member of any league in which it can play football, is it?
No, it's not. It'll need a couple of things. It will need SFA membership for one thing, and then it will need, as a new club, to try to get into the Scottish Premier League. And there is absolutely no guarantee that that will happen. I mean, to be honest with you, if I was a betting man at the moment, my betting would be against them getting into it. I mean, there is almost undisguised hostility from fans of other clubs. You heard the Aberdeen fans there. There's unrelenting and growing hostility towards the possibility of a new club entering the SPL, given, as Mark Daly suggested there, that they appear to have won a great many trophies and all the rest of it on the back of money that they couldn't afford to pay to players. And there's a huge amount of hostility which is now kicking in. Chairmen, the length and breadth of the land, are panicking because season book sales are collapsing in some cases. And they are
really?
panicking.
I mean, do you know that season... Are they? Really?
I've spoken to a couple of clubs in my neck of the woods today. Aberdeen are concerned about their season book sales. Dundee United are concerned about their season book sales. And these clubs...
And this is not because of recession. This is because of Rangers.
This is because fans are so angry at the prospect of a new club entering the Scottish Premier League, given the history and given what has been unveiled through programmes like Mark's. And the ongoing, of course, hostility, if you want, towards one of the great big clubs of Scottish football, who have won more than everyone else. If you combine all of that together, then fans at clubs the length and breadth of the land are angry and do not want to see them in the SPL.
I wonder, Stephen Morrow, we will, of course, hear lots of club chairmen saying, oh, I understand that my fans are angry and I will, of course, be consulting them. But in a financial sense, does it make sense for these clubs to say that Rangers cannot come back into the Scottish Premier League?
No, I think if you look at it from, well, I guess there's two parts to that. From a narrow financial point of view, their first pressure, of course, is around the media deal. And, you know, all the suggestions are that that media deal is dependent on 4 games between Celtic and Rangers. That's money that many of these clubs, or certainly some of these clubs, cannot afford to do without. But at the same time, there's a commercial argument as well as the kind of broader social argument around the supporters, where you're the supporters, for one of the first times in this business of football, are threatening economic sanctions against their clubs and against the league. Now that means that they've got this particular dilemma. Leaving aside sporting integrity, they have got an issue around which of these is the biggest risk to their business model. And remember, some of these clubs are very much trading on the edge as it is. You potentially run the risk of taking Rangers out of the Premier League and losing the Sky deal if that is the scenario, and that might be enough to tip some clubs over. But at the same time, if you don't do that, you run the risk, as Jim has hinted, that has said that some of these supporters will simply not renew their season tickets, and these are your customers.
Douglas, they unfortunately have to make these decisions, don't they? Because, as I understand it, is the SPL chairman, or women, if there are any women chairman, I think there are actually, Motherwell, they're going to have to make this decision.
Yes, I mean, they'll discuss it with, any chair would have to discuss it with directors as well. They'll all be involved. And they're having to strike this balance between an unknown quantity of an unprecedented boycott by their customers on an issue of integrity, which doesn't have much to do with business. It's about sport, it's about fairness. Set against this Sky deal is the crucial one. It's not just the money that's coming in from Sky over the next 5 years, but it's also all the other sponsorship deals that flow from that. All the logos on shirts, the shirt sponsorship, is dependent on the television cameras being there to film them. And so you get, between, very roughly speaking, between 20 and 40% of income of most of these clubs, the revenue, will come from revenue related to the TV deal. That's TV deal plus all the other sponsorship. Now, if you knew 5 years down the line that you're no longer going to have a Sky deal, you could adjust your the pay bill that you've got, all your costs, you could adjust over time. But to be told for the start of next season that you may have that suddenly cut away, or you just don't know and you don't know how to plan, that's a very big problem for these boards.
I'm going to put you in the spot, Jim. What is your guess, forecast, whatever you want to call it? Do you think they will vote to allow Rangers into the SPL?
No, I don't. I think a couple of weeks ago I would have taken the gamble that they would have. I think there's been a massive amount of fan hostility at other clubs, particularly at Dundee United, Aberdeen, Hibs and Hearts and others.
And you think that will
I think there are now enough clubs prepared to balance that argument about sporting integrity and the long-term sporting integrity of the game against the possibility of broadcast revenue being lost.
I'm curious, Robert McElroy, what do you think Rangers fans would want? Because I've heard quite a few people who are just fans. I've actually heard people who are rather high up or were rather high up in the organisation of the club saying, well, do you know what, we'd rather go into Division 3 and work our way up again because it wouldn't leave this stain on the reputation of the club.
Yeah, there is a body of opinion to that effect. I mean, the feeling amongst Rangers fans, I believe, is, well, if these other SPL clubs don't want us, then, let them see how they can get on without Rangers in their division. The Sky deal has already been mentioned. I think it's a bit rich of Aberdeen fans in particular to complain about sporting integrity. I think I'm right in saying this is a club that twice in the last 12 years has avoided relegation due to other clubs not having fit grounds to be promoted into the SPL.
Okay, but right, I'm just curious about which side, you say that the Rangers fans are divided. Which side would you come down on?
I've got an open mind on the subject.
You've got an open mind?
Yes.
Right, Richard Wilson, I want to ask you about something that everyone seems to have forgotten about, which is that it's not just about the SPL, is it? Allowing Rangers back in. There is, meanwhile, the SFA sanctions against Rangers, which were overturned in the Court of Session. That's been kicked back to the SFA to decide what sanctions to take against Rangers. Meanwhile, UEFA are furious because they don't like football clubs going to courts of law. They think they should, as Michel Platini says, does that mean every time there's a red card it's going to end up as a court case? So there's an SFA problem as well for Rangers, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, as soon as the Newco Rangers apply for the league share, it's 2 weeks until the SPL hold their vote. In theory, the appellate tribunal could have sat before then and suspended Rangers membership or indeed expelled them. So you could have the scenario where the SPL vote is academic. I don't think it will come to that, and I do disagree slightly with Jim's analysis. I think when it comes to the crunch, SPL clubs will vote Rangers back in. I agree with his point about...
But what can the SFA do? Because we don't want to get bogged down in the technicalities. My understanding of the Court of Session ruling was that they couldn't ban them from having player transfers because that wasn't specifically mentioned. But if they want to go up a level from fines, isn't expulsion the only thing they've got left?
They could suspend Rangers membership. And I think it was interesting that when this story kind of arose after the court case, there was a doubt at the SFA, or a doubt at least amongst the panel members about exactly what suspension meant. Did that mean suspending the club for a number of games? Did it mean suspending them for an entire season? And I'm not, at this stage, Rangers could still accept a registration embargo. They could appeal the decision themselves and see where that takes them back at the Court of Session, or they could allow the appellate tribunal to sit again and see what that appellate tribunal decides.
Ken Petula, there's something that's been referred to, but isn't the other side of this, there's a very dangerous precedent here. If I am a club in the SPL or indeed any other football league, and I'm struggling a bit, and I think, look what's happened to Rangers, I think I'll go into liquidation.
Yep, I think that's absolutely right. I think there is a dangerous precedent. Having said that, Rangers is a different case. Rangers is almost, if you like, the RBS of Scottish football. It is too big to be allowed to fail. If you look at some of the other clubs like Airdrie, for example, which have gone into liquidation, Livingston were relegated to Division 3. Other clubs, that sort of sanction has been imposed on them. The problem here is...
But if Jim Spence is right, that there's immense anger, can you imagine the anger there would be if in 6 months' time a club which is perhaps not as prominent as Rangers did the same thing and everyone turned around and said, right, you're out of the league, while Rangers have been allowed back in? I mean, you just couldn't have that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, and Jim's analysis is correct that there is enormous anger amongst these other clubs at what they see as preferential treatment for Rangers. But nevertheless, Rangers is perhaps a different case. Rangers and Celtic are the two biggest clubs in Scotland without question. What I suspect might happen, and I disagree with Jim in this, I suspect Rangers will be allowed back into the SPL, but with perhaps a very, very large points deduction.
Right. Now, there is another side to this, isn't there? We're talking as if it's all about Rangers. There'll be lots of people watching this programme tonight who perhaps aren't interested in football. Isn't it a perfectly legitimate question from them to say, look, hang on a minute, is this right that Rangers as a football club keeps on existing and they can now be in the SPL and all the rest of it, when, as of now, they've basically had a business model which was, let's not bother paying our tax? Why is it a bunch of people who kick footballs around a field get away without paying taxes and not having to pay it back, when the rest of us would get absolutely clobbered?
Well, that's not really any different from any other company. What has happened here is that all the assets have been purchased by the new company. It is the new company.
But there is an
which
issue
will continue
from, I mean, HMRC clearly want the public to see that they are acting in the public interest. Have they, in your view, succeeded in being convincing on that front?
I think they have. They have voted to appoint liquidators, and that is a significant step. What liquidators will have to do is take action against any of the former directors or anyone else who has been involved in the former club of Rangers. And they will also have to submit a report to the Insolvency Service. Now, Craig White has already been banned by the Insolvency Service for 7 years, so that's not a prospect he'll be looking forward to with any relish.
Well, Mark, again, I want to look at the other side of this. In a way, this is about football, but it's also about corporate governance, isn't it? And it's clear from your investigations that some very strange things were going on. But it's also clear that HMRC is a bit fed up with what... It's not just in Scotland either. It thinks that somehow football has, for years, thought it could just go its own merry way and not pay any attention to doing basic things like paying tax that the rest of us have to do.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a collapse of corporate governance over almost 2 decades at Rangers. And the fact that HMRC have effectively gone for liquidation shows that they don't appear to be that bothered about getting their money back immediately, because there is only just over £5 million available for creditors in the pot. Now, the current administrator's fees, as I understand it, sit at around about £5 million. So Duff and Phelps and all their related legal fees will soak up almost all of that. HMRC are, of course, aware of this, yet they've still decided to go down the liquidation route. So they must see a means where they can get more money for themselves. But also, I think they really feel a need to teach a lesson here that you can't not pay your bills. You can't go about behaving in this sort of manner, and we will come after you.
All right. Look, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed. I think we have time for a very quick look at tomorrow's front pages, starting with the Scotsman. Governor's warning on the global economy, it says, and there's a picture of Walter Smith. The Guardian, there it is. UK warned of debt storm from Europe, it says. That's all we have time for tonight. Until Monday, good night.